And what we're solving right now is one of the most fundamental problems that exists everywhere. It's about the flow of data, which has been a problem for decades and something that is still not robustly fixed, and we have an ability to solve for good. There is a bit of a dirty secret here, which is
our planet right now is being scanned in real time thousands of times every single day. Satellites, drones, sensors all over the planet. And satellite data isn't just for maps, it powers national security, how we respond to disasters, and the systems that move the world. But there's a brutal bottleneck and a problem in all of this. Satellite data is so massive that it's super expensive to store and almost impossible to bring down back to Earth. Today we're joined by the team that are solving that problem, Michael Stanway and Joe Griffiths, founders of the compression company. I met the team on a trip a couple of months back in San Francisco, and they were going through the Residency, which has quickly become the best way to live and work with other founders and start a company in San Francisco. They then came through Entrepreneur First and raised a 3.4 million pre-seed led by some amazing investors, Long Journey Ventures, Ludlow, and fantastic angels like Lucas Bewald. I'm Joe, this is Founders and Builders. As always, if you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to hit subscribe down below, and now let's get into it. So I'd love to start with you, Michael. Could you give us the pitch that helped you raise, I think it was just over $3.5 million in 10 days?
Yeah, 100%, Joe. So space is the next frontier. Humanity is investing trillions of dollars into orbit, and we're seeing things like factories and data centers and thousands of Earth observation satellites be put up into space. Now, what we kind of saw through our journey is that there is a bit of a dirty secret here, which is these satellites, almost all of the data that they generate stays trapped in orbit, right? And this is because of something really fundamental, which is the data, the imagery is really, really big, and they have this tiny amount of bandwidth to send it to the ground. It's kind of like sucking a watermelon through a straw, right? So until this moment, the only way to bring more data down has been to send hundreds more satellites into space. What we're doing and what enabled us to raise this money is we're building AI compression algorithms to let each satellite send down 10 to 100 times more imagery. And this doesn't require any changes to the hardware on board the satellite, very importantly. So we've already seen demand. We're already beginning orbital deployments and rollouts at the start of next year, including operators that are willing to spend millions of dollars with us to get this imagery down, because it's their biggest bottleneck to growth. We like to say, me and Joe, that we have like an obsession with compression. We began working together actually doing compression for neural interfaces at Imperial, where we were both working on our masters. Joe went on after that to do his PhD, as I'm sure he'll tell you about. And when we kind of realized the magnitude of opportunity here, he decided to drop out, and we began the process of building the compression company, more or less. Now, the way I see it, the space economy is at a bit of an inflection point. You know, SpaceX, they're doing these launches, they're sending up the atoms, as it were. The compression company will bring down the bits.
So Joe, we've talked about this before. Tell us about this moment that we have in the world right now and why, I think the example that you used before is like, if you take an iPhone, every year they bring out a new iPhone with a bigger sensor, more megapixels. The size of the data that we're able to generate as humanity is risen exponentially, but the bandwidth, especially for space applications, just isn't there.
Every year, the new iPhone comes out and it has slightly better camera with slightly more megapixels, which means that every photo you take is just a larger file on the device. And yeah, we can have bigger storage devices on the camera, but one thing that isn't increasing as fast is how fast we can move that data off the device. And you see the same trend happening in satellites, drones, autonomous vehicles, pretty much anywhere where you want these kind of intelligent systems to generate and capture data. The best example of this is the satellites that image our planet. Think Google Maps, or and then other kind of commercial sectors which use this imagery. They're basically in a race to get the best, highest resolution satellite they possibly can, increasing the resolution of these sensors down to centimeters now. Each image they take can now go down to 20 centimeters a pixel. That means you can almost tell where people are from satellites in space in low Earth orbit, which is mind-blowing.
Is that right? 20 centimeters per pixel?
That's like the state of the art right now. At least that's the state of the art publicly right now. But yeah, obviously amazing technology. Downside, the amount of data that generates is colossal. Not only that, you've also got these satellites which capture what's called multispectral imagery. It's essentially, think an RGB image, like most are red, green, and blue. There's 3 images layered on top of each other. Multispectral, hundreds of channels, sometimes even multiple hundreds. Those are referred to as hyperspectral typically. From those, you can detect really interesting characteristics like the different elements in the atmosphere, such as methane, which you can't see with your human eye. But the downside is the size of the data is just colossal. And so that's why we're starting with the satellites there. We're trying to leverage the fact that these sensors are now generating so much data, but the bandwidth hasn't caught up and increased at the same rate, by capturing that delta, by making the data smaller so we can get more of it down to the ground where it actually can be utilized.
I'd love for those listeners, including me, that don't know much about like the satellite industry, and you guys have been heads down in it for the last 9 months. Like, what are we using satellite data for today? I'm thinking like maybe national defense, supply chain, transport and logistics. Could you kind of unpack why satellite data is so valuable?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a lot of the use cases right there. Like, there's huge applications in defense, for governments in monitoring their borders or how their cities are developing. Another really cool application of, Joe mentioned these hyperspectral cameras. Something that they can do, because they're able to detect certain frequencies of light, they can actually see a little bit below the ground, so like 10 centimeters down. And this is really cool for mining companies because, okay, I'm a mining company. What is the best situation? Oh, I can see below the ground. I can know what kind of chemicals or minerals I might be drilling to get. With these hyperspectral cameras, you can get way more information on what you might want to drill. And so this is where there is like huge amounts of application for these commercial entities.
And what becomes possible for these satellite companies and for the world more broadly if we're able to get, I think you guys mentioned with your solution, up to 100 times more data down from satellites?
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 sides to this. There's the first, which is more data, which means you can you can view the entire world on a semi-continuous basis, revisiting very frequently, more than 1 time per day, really seeing how things evolve. And then the second thing, and this is also a really valuable use case, is you can get that imagery down much faster. So for defense, as an example, they want to know what's going on their battlefield or in their area of interest right now. But because of this tiny bandwidth, they have to wait sometimes days for the imagery of the area to come down. If they can compress this imagery, make it a lot smaller, all of a sudden they can view this in hours or seconds potentially, which is enormously valuable for them when they're making these like fast, quick decisions about what to do.
So that's on the kind of the market and the importance of satellite data. Joe, I'd love to get your thoughts as you're the CTO of the business. Like, what needs to be possible technically for the compression company to work?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Like, why now? Honestly, it's the compute that's available on board these satellites. Pretty much last year is the first time we've had NVIDIA Jetsons put on board these satellites, which really enable the kind of compression that we're working with here, these deep neural networks that can make the data far smaller and we can send more of it down, essentially. And that's essentially how I see how we're creating value. We're arbitraging this extra compute that's available on the device for more powerful compression algorithms that can achieve better performance.
Satellites and data isn't where you guys started working. So I'd love to understand, most of the people watching Founders and Builders are first-time founders, people interested in technology, trying to think about what are the ideas they could be working on, what could they be building. When we spoke, you two actually met together at Imperial and you were part of the Neuralink challenge, Elon's company Neuralink. What was that challenge?
The problem that Neuralink released was they're generating huge amounts of data from their neural interface, the electrodes that they have kind of drilled into these brains, and they're struggling to get it off board so that they can process it. And so in a very Elon Musk fashion, they released this essentially impossible challenge, which was compress this data by several 100x losslessly. I know that's technical jargon, but that's impossible. And so within a society that I had founded at Imperial, the Imperial Neurotech Society, which is doing amazing things now, we were running a couple of projects, and this was one of these. And Joe and I began working on kind of different solutions for this and exploring some of the like representation learning, those different approaches and how it might apply to this type of data. And that's really when we got a taste for, well, two things: working together, which was really awesome, and kind of I think the first time when we really started thinking about, is maybe this is the beginning of something huge, and then of compression and the challenges that come with data movement and data flow and how we can resolve that.
Mm-hmm. You actually ended up dropping out of your PhD, Joe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
When you realized this was getting serious and you wanted to start the compression company with Michael, can you take us back to that moment?
Yeah. So I always wanted to kind of to found something, go through it kind of the entrepreneurial route. I have this wall at home with had this wall at home with this various different scratch cards I've written different ideas on, all of which look embarrassingly simple now and terrible businesses, honestly. And when I was going to Imperial for that 1 year for the masters, I was kind of keeping an eye out for potential co-founders and met Michael through the Neurotech Society. And then, when we explored different technologies that we had alignment on, and then he found a problem space that made a lot of sense, it was obvious to give it a shot. And then I interrupted the PhD. So it was a low risk bet at the time. And then obviously 3 months later or 6 months later, when we got the funding from EF, that was when and then we had to move out to SF. That was when it made total sense to pull the full trigger, completely drop out and go on this full time with Michael, which was honestly an easy decision at the time. It was definitely so aligned, and it just made sense.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned EF, so let's jump into that. So some people might not know, Entrepreneurs First, what is the program and what did you guys think of the experience?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the first thing off the top of the head, Entrepreneurs First is an awesome program that exists in London. I think an easy way to contextualize it is they invest in people at the beginning of their founding journey. You come in without necessarily an idea, or in most cases without a co-founder. They give you a stipend to support you for a few months while you explore a problem space. And then if they are compelled by you as a team and the idea you're working on, they'll invest money. And the pipeline now is that you go out to SF to raise. We actually were different from most teams in the sense we arrived having already, formed our team necessarily. We'd already began working together. And so EF was an excellent vehicle to teach us the kind of foundations of how to found a company, what we should do in order to find these problems, coming from an academic background, and really propel us in this cohort of super experienced and super awesome builders into San Francisco and into that wider market.
This was Michael's second time doing EF. What did you learn the second time round that maybe you didn't know the first time?
Yeah, for sure. So I actually began EF October last year, and I went through a cohort while Joe was doing his PhD, where again I was mainly exploring things that were technologically based on my master's, which was kind of working around how to keep brains alive outside the body. So taking pieces of brain tissue and preserving them basically to run tests about different cancer assays or things along those lines. And this is something that me and Joe aligned on in the early days, where the analogy often used is a hammer looking for a nail, right? I think it's very easy for a lot of engineers to join the founding space thinking, hey, I've got this set of expertise, I've got these technological skills, I want to build this technology, let's figure out how to make that work commercially. What we learned as we went through, and this was definitely exemplified in the second cohort, is actually listen to people, talk to people, spend way more time learning about the problem space than you do actually building it in the first few months and weeks. And that was something, I don't know if you have more to add on that.
Yeah, no, that was such a brutal lesson to learn at the time. Yeah. As you said, hammer looking for a nail. And I think we actually had this accidental strategy that kind of worked well, which was we had a cool technology which guided us through different problem spaces. It gave us something to reach out to these industry experts about and gave them a reason to want to talk to us. And it was in those conversations that we uncovered the real problem an actual problem that we could solve, in which case we dumped our technology, which was actually a painful thing to do at the time. It took us longer to do than we should have done, and then focus on the problem that we've been introduced to.
Tell us about the traction. So, when we met, actually, it was a trip that I was on in SF, my first time in the city. We were both part of this house called the Residency. So, for those that haven't heard about the Residency, tell us about it. Like, how can people learn about it? Should they get involved if they're building a company?
Honestly, it's so funny to like reflect because we've been through, I guess, so many different communities of founders and builders at this point. Yeah, and the Residency is another one of these like amazing places where we met people like you and other builders out in San Francisco. Um, we were really working there at this second half of the Entrepreneur First process where we had a rough sense of the idea we wanted to work on and like the basic technological underpinnings. And while we were there, we were really just heads down building constantly. During the time there, we got the compression up and running. We got it working on the hardware that it will be running on in space. We had like a little GPU sitting on the desk in Joe's room that was just constantly whirring away. And then and like kind of one of the big moments was when we received our first like major LOI from a satellite operator for deployment across their entire constellation.
LOI?
Letter of intent. And this was off the back of us spending a lot of time talking to them, understanding their problems, and then going out to Paris, meeting them in person, and really getting a sense of, okay, this would be enormous for their business. And so that's why they committed to this, and that would represent $18 million in terms of ARR at full rollout, which would be exceptional.
The Residency, for those folks that don't know, it's like 3-month, or I think they do 6-month program where whether you have an idea and a co-founder or you don't, but you're ambitious and you want to create something new in the world, you can go live in one of these founding houses. I think it's Nick and Peter that run the program. I think they have some amazing backers like Sam Altman. And I know, Joe, you had some thoughts on your experience in the Residency. What did you think?
I think the best thing about the Residency is the diversity of people that it attracts and how aligned everyone is there to the same kind of goal. Everyone is incentivized to help each other and help each other succeed, essentially. And because in the long run, those connections you build, those friends you make, 5 years down the line, you've no idea where these people are going to be. And everyone there has such high potential that you just you feel compelled to help them get there. Both for selfish reasons, but also for collaborative reasons, because it's an amazing thing to see. And you got people from like 50-year-old VCs who have seen it all before, and they just want to kind of bestow the lessons down to the newer generation, down to 17-year-old high school dropouts who honestly just bring like a level of like wide-eyed ambition that is nice to see, honestly.
But when you say like 17-year-old high school, you mean also 17-year-old high school dropouts that have like raised millions of dollars and have done crazy things already?
I left out Abbott, yeah.
It's crazy. It's
honestly, yeah.
Around.
And it was seeing kind of from our perspective going through this phase for the first ever time, encountering all these different challenges, like how do we improve our pitch, how do we make it better, how do we build a pitch deck, how do you negotiate $1 million contracts for investment. And there's all these people who've done it before and we can kind of leverage that experience. Was so helpful, and it's honestly like a really nice environment to be in.
And I think something to add on what Joe just said was, we were very much working in the open while we were there, and we had members from the house, people staying as guests, yourself, like come up and offer to invest in us while we were working, because they got to see the work ethic and the discussions Joe and I were having, where we were sitting basically in this room 24/7 coding and messaging and jumping on calls. And so like the beginning of the raise was really supported by this amazing community of people that wanted to back us just from their exposure. And that was such a validating things in the eyes of VCs we were speaking to, because who gets more exposure to you than your flatmates, than the people that see you getting up and going to work every single day? That's enormous.
I'd love to dive into this topic of how you ran that whole fundraising process. But I think first, classic question many investors will ask is, tell us about the traction. What have you learned from customers? Have they committed to spend with you? Like, what traction have you had since you started the company?
Sure, yeah. So the start of the company was predominantly around like building out the compression tech, getting it running on the technology that they have in orbit, the GPUs and the compute. And then what we saw in the middle of this, our time at the Residency, is we began kind of exploring orbital deployments with satellite operators. One of them actually signed an LOI with us for deployment across their entire constellation, which was a huge step because they've got this, currently I think they have about 8 satellites and they're expanding that to 30 in the next couple of years. which would be enormous value to us. So we've gone in a really short space of time from exploring this idea space, building out something that works in theory, to now being on multiple satellites in space, which is a really tough thing to do, and is really awesome that we've managed to get there so quickly.
And a big milestone, just before we started recording, you both said that the plan is to be in space by the end of January 2026.
Yes, the current sprint we're in. We have to ship our package by the end of this year, essentially. So that's wrapping our core compression tech inside some application with some sample data and the environment it needs. And then that's going to be launched on a satellite, which hopefully we can watch the launch of.
Yeah.
That would be very cool. And then by January, February, we're going to be able to get data down to see, make sure everything works perfectly fine on board, under these kind of radiation conditions. And yeah, that's going to be our first kind of flight heritage piece of evidence. That's going to be very exciting.
And the reason that I see that as really cool for us is Joe mentioned that we're going to be launched up on that satellite. We don't need to be launched up on a satellite. We, as a package, can be sent up at any point in the middle of a satellite launch. And so once we have this validation in space, we see it as a really fast process to expand into all of these other satellite operators who are looking for compression solutions that they can implement before at any point during the mission.
And sell us the big picture here, because when we were speaking in SF, you said, well, it starts with satellite data. Hyperspectral is really where you're focused. These advanced sensors on, thousands of satellites in space. But really what you're trying to build is a compression factory. You want to build the machine that builds these compression algorithms. Could you kind of explain it to us like we weren't from the space?
Of course. Well, there's two trends that I may have mentioned earlier are, the data generation, more data being generated every second on these devices, but also the bandwidth not being able to keep up with it. Satellites are where this problem is faced the most. They generate the most amount of data, they have the worst bandwidth. But the pattern is kind of reproducible in so many other industries, from the drones to robotics, autonomous vehicles, and even medical imagery, which you've had experienced. You have these sensors generating so much data and not being able to get it back to the servers. And what we want to do is provide a unique, bespoke compression algorithm for any sensor, essentially. And the way to do this is not to build a general purpose algorithm, but a pipeline that we can just funnel data into, and it would spit out a software package for any sensor that can be deployed on the device that is optimized just for that camera. And it can drastically outperform general purpose compression as a result.
Super quick one from me. Every week we ask our listeners, what is one tool or one product they started using that they couldn't live without? And this week, it's CoreWeave. If you're building with AI, you need to check out CoreWeave. They have a GPU cloud infrastructure built just for artificial intelligence. CoreWeave are used by the world's leading AI labs and have recently signed a multi-billion-dollar deal to power OpenAI's training and inference. They're also the only AI cloud awarded platinum by SemiAnalysis across performance, reliability, and scale. And for you building with AI, that means less time fighting infrastructure, more time iterating on your models, and shipping products. So if you want to learn more about CoreWeave, check out the link down in the description below. But for now, let's get back into the episode. One of the topics that I want to get your take on, guys, is this the importance of finding the right co-founder. So Joe, when we first met and you were telling me about the compression company, one of the first things you said was, and I'm just so excited to be building it with Michael. This is going to be the first of many things we go on to create together. I think the stat is the first 2 years of any startup, the number one reason it fails is a co-founder breakup, misalignment, don't want to take the company in the same direction. What advice, knowing what you know now, would you give to somebody that's looking to find the right co-founder for them?
At the time, I didn't really have a strategy for looking for a co-founder. I was more just putting myself in circumstances where I can meet people with similar interests. So that's why I went to study neurotechnology. I thought brains are cool. Building brain-computer interfaces is even cooler. And, I thought by going to research this kind of topic, I'd be put in a room with loads of other like-minded individuals. And that was definitely the case. The Neurotech Society that Michael spun up at the same time was even bigger pool of such similar people. But then whistling it down to kind of the group of friends, that was the second filter. So going from that pool of like-minded individuals to the pool of people I really get on with. And then from there, the people who had the exact same long-term ambitions, which was Michael and another friend of ours. Those were the two where it was so clear that I wouldn't want to found a company with anyone else, because it's not just about this company, it's about the next 80 years.
The thing that I think is really important in why it's so significant to find a co-founder that you're really enticed to work with for a long period of time is, that feeling of like if you've done a team sport or you've like been in a pair in some way, when you get to know each other, you get to know each other's ebbs and flows, and when you work really well and when you don't, and you kind of compound over time. I think if you're in a situation where you have a co-founding relationship that lasts decades or centuries, if all this longevity stuff works out, that's how you get to be one of the most productive and important and significant teams of all time. And we see this in like the billionaires these days that exist. They have these teams of people around them that are actually the same people going through time, and they just get better and better at working with each other. And so because me and Joe have this same like long-term alignment on what the future of humanity should look like, we have a really compelling platform from which to build a relationship. And I guess to link it to the title of this show, right? It's like founders and builders. Yes, we're building a company, but really at the core, what you're building in the first instance is a relationship with your co-founder. And it's not that there is a right person, a soulmate co-founder out there for you. You will have tension, you will have fights, you'll have moments when you want to strangle the other person across the room. I never did, but
Oh, I did. You don't need to answer that, Joe.
But it's about having the base where you can build something that compounds over time, in my opinion. And that's what you need to be looking for, someone you can build that relationship with.
I'd love to jump into fundraising with you guys. So when we met in SF, right at the start of your raise, you said, hey, Joe, we're thinking about raising $1.5 million or $2 million at a push. You ended up raising $3.5 million in just about 10 days from a cold start, and brought us on some amazing investors. Like I can think Long Journey Ventures. And I was just, reading through earlier. So Lee Jacobs, early investor in Crusoe, Together AI, and companies like Loom. I think Cyan Bannister, one of the first checks into Uber and SpaceX, so totally relevant for your space. And then also Ariel Zuckerberg from Long Journey. She built out and launched Coatue early stage fund before joining Long Journey. So take us all the way through the start. For first time founders raising that round, what did that process look like and what were the learnings there?
We went through a whole number of steps at the beginning. The first thing that went into it was a whole bunch of preparation. I did probably 40 to 50 practice investor calls with friends and family, with people in our network, with Entrepreneurs First, before we even began that process. And once we were in that, we had basically some great advice at the beginning from Kylie, one of the GPs at 500 Global, who was living in the Residency house at the time, who kind of described there being different steps to fundraising that you need to hit, thresholds of having incredible quality angels on board, having discussions with smaller funds, working your way up to the bigger funds that you really want involved in your round. And so for us, the process was all about this gaining momentum. We began by getting a number of angels on board. You yourself were our first angel, which was incredible and kind of one of the huge like motivators at the beginning of this raising process. Like, yes, we can do this. And then from there, we brought on people like Lucas, founder of Weights and Biases, and moved up and up to Long Journey Ventures. And the reason that they were so compelling to have in the round is, as you mentioned, Cyan Bannister was the first investor in SpaceX. And so there's a real story to be built around them as an investor in us and why they're an exceptional early partner for us, because they have this understanding of that space and of what works in that space as evidenced by that investment. And so then when we go to meet with all of the other investors, I probably spoke to like 100. I think after demo day, we had around 100 investor conversations lined up over the next week. It was a really hectic time.
Looking at your calendar, it made me nauseous.
It was like a wall. It was crazy. Yeah, I was basically waking up at 7 and then being on calls like nonstop, maybe like 10 minutes for lunch until 7 p.m. like that night.
So you want to be a CEO?
Yeah. I don't know how you did it. I remember joining you for one of these in-person calls, and I came home and I lay on the floor and woke up 2 hours later. Yeah, honestly, I think it was just the intensity of all those meetings. Yeah.
Yeah.
So honestly,
but I think like being in that zone, like this is kind of the only way to do it. When you're doing it in like a really tight and really short time frame, you can keep up that level of intensity, which is not only helpful for you being in it, but also for driving like the FOMO amongst the investors. They're aware that you're running this type process. They're aware that you're speaking to everyone in town because, they're talking to the other investors about which companies they're looking at right now, and all of them are saying the compression company or, whatever company is out there raising at the time. And this, coupled with getting Long Journey over the line, really just added to this momentum that we were building in the round, which allows us to close quite quickly and in a really great fashion.
There were a couple of other great funds as well. I think you mentioned Forward Deployed Capital, also Fractal Capital from Marwan that we met through the Residency. Anybody else?
Yeah, Ludlow Ventures, they're also backing us. They were early backers in Honey, I believe, and they've been an incredible team for us to work with so far. Forward Deployed, as you mentioned, Mark, he was an early employee at Palantir. I think he was actually the first employee to ever be given preferential shares. He invested really early in Palantir as an employee. I have this huge appreciation for the team of investors we built around us. I feel, one of the things we've talked about plenty behind the scenes is this feeling of momentum, and I feel like it's given us a lot of momentum coming out this race to see all of these incredible minds and incredible funds agreeing that we have a right to win in this huge space.
This topic of momentum that you just mentioned, I'm really glad you brought it up, because last time when we spoke, Joe, you said the only thing that matters is getting to the next step of the game, right? And at every step, there is only one or two things that you need to do well, and that builds momentum. What did you mean by that?
I don't know. It feels, to everyone else, it seems really fast. It's been only 6 months. But to us, doing it, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, it's very slow, right? And making it through the slower periods where not much is changing was really tough. And there were periods where there were down periods, where we're thinking about deferring raising, or every time we had to make a small pivot into a new direction. Those are always tough periods. And what we really found was the best technique to get through those was focusing on just the next milestone, the next little win that we could achieve. How can we win something? Whether this be a hackathon we enter to do a bit of iterational deployment of our tech, or try and close a customer, I guess. Each of those moments we leveraged in order to motivate us to drive to the next one. And also, they're also kind of learning experiences, because if you shape them, each milestone that we focus on, whether it be the customer, the raise, or building out the technology, or hiring even, each one of those phases is a key learning point to become an expert in a new skill. And they give kind of useful structure that enables you to just keep marching onwards.
I think to build off that, something that I think is really important in both your communication and progress as a company is executing really well on some very specific things, kind of ruthless prioritization around those things. For customers, that is specific metrics that are hyper relevant to them, trying to decide whether to use your product. For investors, that is, again, one or two really key details which push them over the line as to whether they want to back you and your team.
What were those details, in your case?
For the raise, it was, I think the two things that I was really, really key to communicate to investors were, one, our fit as founders, particularly because of Joe's background and understanding of this space, which is incredibly rare and incredibly detailed. And then the second is kind of the early traction and the magnitude of the tickets that we're going to be able to get from each satellite operator. As I mentioned, one of them signed an LOI for $18 million ARR at full rollout. So those kind of things are enough to grab people's eyes. If I look at the stats of people looking at our deck, they looked at it for 20 seconds on average, nothing. And that's enough for them to understand one thing. And so when it comes to building this company, if you can push towards those with really specific metrics, really specific proof points, I think this enables you to get that feeling of momentum, because you're winning on the things that matter, without feeling fatigued by trying to do 100 different things at once. One moment we had that I really, really remember and drove this home was just after we raised from EF. We got the money from them in the early days, moved out to San Francisco, and we were cycling through the streets of San Francisco in first week or two. And Joe, you had a big accident because you were practically knocked out by it. We were cycling along and he just fell off and smashed his head.
We were cycling along, we were racing, but at least from my perspective.
Can I just ask who won the race?
Definitely not me.
You don't remember?
I mean, he was technically in front at the time. Yeah, that would have been funny if I'd cycled along and just like looked back and like, I'm really winning this. That meant the next week or two was on Joe's end recovery, and on my end, like half of my team's been killed off. I can only
Incapacitated, not killed off.
Yeah, incapacitated, and that like really slowed our momentum at that really important moment. And I remember picking back up and trying to move the customer conversations forward, like after that little like time off, and move the technology forward again when you're trying to remember how it works, and get back into the flow of again like working these extreme hours. That is something that I don't want us to go through again, in terms of like having to pick it up. We're at the stage now where we've got the momentum coming off this raise. We're going to have the momentum continued as we deploy in orbit. And I think, for us, building our team in that phase of momentum, building up the number of customers we have onboarded, this will be the way that we continue this momentum and continue to kind of stay on this trajectory into an enormous and kind of globally defining company.
When you have those really key hard challenges building a company, what can you do to build momentum?
I think it is a huge degree of getting a win, right? When I think about the moments when our relationship had the most turmoil, or when we weren't sleeping correctly or taking care of our health, it was always in those moments when you've had no wins and everything kind of something goes wrong. So like you feel exhausted at the end of the day, and instead of getting back on your laptop, you're like, no, I just need a day off, or I can't do this. Whereas you never feel like that after you've just had a massive win. You're jumping up and down for joy, and you're like, screw dinner, I want to keep working on this is amazing. And so I know the term win is kind of ill-defined here, but even if that's a technical milestone, if that's executing really well on like a particular customer conversation, as a co-founder, one thing that is really important to do is recognize those wins for your co-founder, because sometimes it's hard to notice when you've done something really well. If you're in the moment, you're self-critical, your co-founder can come in and say, hey, I just sat in on you on that job interview, and I thought you nailed it. I thought you asked all the questions that you really needed to ask. I thought you were so much better than you were even yesterday. That's what a great co-founding relationship means, because even it keeps this feeling of momentum up, and so you can really motivate each other, I think, to recognize the wins.
I love this idea that at any point you can just decide to change your behavior and go and learn something. Joe, what is one thing this year that you started off as a complete beginner at, knew next to nothing about, and now you're really, really good at it?
That's kind of a hard question, because every week there's or every 2 weeks, maybe every month, there's a new challenge that we get faced with, a new type of part of the architecture we have to build out, or a new demo we have to build out for our customers. And each of these requires there's some aspects of technology or implementation I have to build out that I've never done before. And there almost isn't enough time to become like amazing at anything, because you're always focusing on what you're worst at and bringing that up to speed. So it would probably be something on almost the meta layer, which is like being able to not work on what I really want to work on, being able to let latent anxiety reside without having to fix it, because sometimes you've got some hidden concern about, oh, what if this breaks, or this isn't as good as I want it to be, for whether it be for ego reasons, which sometimes it is. And you just have to kind of let that sit and focus on what actually matters, which often is something completely different. And the ability to work on what matters rather than what I want to is probably the skill that I've most refined in these past couple of months, honestly.
You guys are hiring right now, you're growing the company. What's your message to people that are watching this, that are thinking, I want to join a rocket ship company, I want to work with super smart, highly ambitious people. This sounds like an interesting set of problems. I want to get involved in satellites, space, compression. What's your message to them?
What we're solving right now is one of the most fundamental problems that exists everywhere. It's about the flow of data, which has been a problem for decades, and something that is still not robustly fixed, and we have an ability to solve for good. I want people to come and join us if they feel obviously ready to do all the things that you're going to do as a startup, work really, really hard in one of the most exciting and amazing places in the world, and be ready to solve that problem for good with us. Also, can I just add something on that, which is we're going to be in space next month. Like, if you want to come and work for a company where your tech is going to be in space, how many people can say that they built something on a satellite?
These guys are hiring right now.
Right.
Send your applications in. They want to speak to you. Final question from me to each of you individually. So I'll start with you, Joe. If we fast forward, let's say 30, 40 years, and you and I are sitting next to each other on our proverbial rocking chair, and we look up at the stars, let's say we're in London, and imagine you can see the stars without all the pollution. And I turn to you and I say, Joe and Michael, what was it all for?
Well, for me, every kind of action I take or decision I make is, I like to think, is in service of minimizing deathbed regret. And being someone who's a bit of a sci-fi nerd, any piece of media I consume is hard sci-fi related. And so the way I can minimize that regret is by having some significant impact on the technology as implemented in society and kind of pushing that frontier forwards. And I think the best way to do that is in industry and startups who can apply so much leverage to the state of technology in the world right now, because they can do things that giant big corporations like Google and Facebook just can't do. They don't have the agileness of a startup, and they can't take the huge contrarian bets with as much risk that we can. And if that's a compelling mission, then that's what I'd like to meet other people who think the same about.
What about you, Michael? What is it all for?
Like, honestly, 30 to 40 years, I think it will all be for whatever I'm doing at that point. Like, I plan to be solving these kind of big technological challenges for the human race until I drop, whether that's by, natural causes or some kind of technological means that has enabled me to decide to drop dead at a couple of thousand years old, which is the aim. This company is, as I say, solving this problem for good. And there are so many other problems and so many other barriers to human experience and to what it means to be a human in the next 300 years. I want to be working on them for that long. So in 30 years, in 40 years, when you're asking me, what was the compression company all about? It was all about putting us in a place, me and Joe, where we can continue to solve these problems for the rest of time. That's what we're excited about.
It was a problem that we could solve, and then we can move on to the next one.
Yeah, well, not only move on, but like compound, right? Like, there's a problem that we can solve that like accelerates our ability to solve the next one.
That's how I'd frame it too. Yeah.
Joe, Michael, thanks so much for coming on Founders and Builders. It's been a pleasure.